G'day friends, it's Andrew here again from Nature's Image Photography, and this video is about shooting time-lapse on the Panasonic Lumix full-frame cameras. More specifically, I'm using the Lumix S-1, but I understand you have pretty much the same system operated the same way on the S5, and I assume on other full-frame Lumix cameras as well. And if you're one of the many who followed me for the Lumix G9, well, that's where I shot my first ever time-lapse, and you can see that video by clicking the link in the information below. I'm not an expert, and my results, as you'll see, are far from perfect. But for me, the fun part about learning some of this stuff is the chance to share with you what I've learned. And there are quite a few things to get right if you want to do this properly, so let's get started. As always, be sure to subscribe for more on my world of photography, and if you find this video really useful, you can always support me with a coffee, and you'll find the link in the info below as well. So if you don't know, time-lapse is the process of taking a large number of still photos over a longer period of time, which will be turned into a video that will play back over a much shorter period of time. So a sunset shot over an hour could be played back in a 20-second clip. It opens up a whole range of possibilities for your photography, and happily, with a little attention to detail, it can all be done easily in camera. So let's take a look at how to set up the camera for your first time-lapse video. The first step is the simplest one of all. To shoot in time-lapse, you first turn your exposure mode to the second last position on the dial. This is reserved for time-lapse shooting. That enables a special section in the menu which we'll come to in a moment. Before I go there, I have a bit of thinking to do to work out how I want my photos to be taken. You need to make good choices, because if you shoot a sequence of hundreds of photos, you don't want to wait until you're finished to realize you've made a mistake. Most of the functions I want are in the quick menu. At least they are now, since I customized my quick menu to make sure it contains everything I need. If you're not sure how to customize the quick menu on your S1, there's a link to that video in the information below as well. So, using my customized quick menu, the very first thing I want to do is switch to shooting JPEG instead of my usual RAW. Some of the other selections I'm about to make, like aspect ratio, really only apply to a JPEG photo. So if I don't remember this step, nothing else is going to matter. So I've selected fine quality JPEG, and now, speaking of aspect ratio, I'm choosing 16:9 to suit a widescreen format which works well for video. Instead of my usual AWB, I'm setting my white balance to daylight to prevent any automatic changes in the color balance during the shooting sequence. I also go to photo style, and instead of my usual standard, I want to choose something to suit the subject. There are plenty of options to choose from, but because I'm hoping for a bit of wow factor, I decided to go with vivid to punch up the colours a bit. And finally, I want to turn off the image stabilizer. It's recommended to turn the stabilizer off when shooting on a tripod, and I'm about to shoot hundreds of photos on a tripod. I'm also going to change my exposure mode to aperture priority instead of my usual manual, because as the light changes, I want the camera to maintain the exposure automatically, without me having to keep turning dials to change settings. And finally in the setup, I switched my focus mode to manual. I discovered when doing my first attempt on the G9 last year that AFS or autofocus single didn't work, because after a while the focus system simply shut down and I lost focus altogether. So manual focus is the way to ensure your photos stay sharp throughout the entire shooting sequence. So now it's time to go to the menu, and if you've got your exposure mode dial set for time-lapse, then simply pressing the menu button should take you straight to the area you want. And here's where you're going to have to do some maths, because you're going to select the image count, or how many photos you want to shoot, and the interval between shots. Here the camera was still set for the sequence with the cows that I showed you earlier, but at 8-second intervals I felt the cloud movement looked a bit jerky in that video. So for this attempt I'm going to use 5-second intervals, which works out at 12 shots per minute. With an image count of 600, that means I'll be shooting over a 50-minute period with a photo every 5 seconds. Of course, the numbers you use would vary depending on the length of the event and the type of movement you want to capture, but the image count can go as high as 9,999 photos, with intervals as long as 99 minutes and 59 seconds. By the way, it might seem like my fingers and thumbs are all over the place here, and yes, now that I watch it back, it's kind of annoying me too. But I wanted to show you how these menu settings can be selected using the control dials, the touchscreen, or a combination of both, whichever works best for you. We'll come back to look at some more of that menu in a moment, but for this demo I'm now set up and ready to shoot, so let's get into it. Notice I take a good long extra moment to make sure I've got everything right before I press the button. I'm about to take 600 photos, and remember what I said before, you don't want to discover when it's over that you've got something wrong. Finally, I take a deep breath, cross my fingers and press the button for my first shot, and then the camera takes over, shooting another photo every 5 seconds. You can watch the numbers counting down with each new shot. Now, let's fast forward to the end, and because this was a sunset, it was well into dusk by the time it was done. When the sequence finally counts down to 0, the camera asks me if I want to create my video right away. You don't have to, you can save it for later, which I'll show you how that works in a moment. But now, to complete this demo, I click yes, and before I create the video I have one more decision to make. I need to choose a frame rate. There are plenty of options, and it's pretty easy to figure out that the faster the frame rate, the shorter the video is going to be. I'm choosing 25 frames per second, which will give me a 24-second video. With that done, I go back and click yes to create the video, and the process begins. As you'd expect, it takes a bit of time, so again let's fast forward to the end where the video appears in my review screen and is now available to play. I touch the screen here to begin playback, but because it's a bit painful to view like this, here's the actual clip you just saw me create. There's no editing here, this is the original video taken straight out of camera. Unfortunately, it was a bit of a lackluster sunset, nowhere near as good as the one I shot the night before with the cows. But do keep watching to the end because I've got something a lot better on the way. So now that you've seen the basic process, more or less from start to finish, I want to take you back for a closer look at that menu and the bits I skipped past before. As I mentioned earlier, as long as your mode dial is set to that second last position, simply clicking the menu button should take you straight to the area you want. This part of the menu also allows you to shoot stop motion animation, so the first item on the screen lets you make your selection between time-lapse and stop motion. Now stop motion is something I haven't tried and probably never will, so my selection here is time-lapse. Next on the menu you have shooting interval setting. If you turn that off, then you no longer choose a shooting interval. The camera will just keep snapping with no interval in between, so as soon as one shot is finished the next shot starts. I haven't done anything with the interval off at this stage. And next you can choose a start time. When it's set to now, your time-lapse sequence starts when you press the button, but you can schedule it to start later. So for example, if you want to shoot a sunrise but you don't want to get out of bed to do it, you can always set everything up to night and schedule it to start shooting tomorrow morning. Image count and shooting interval we've already looked at, and then the final menu heading is for exposure leveling. You might have noticed that I had this one switched off for my previous demo, and the video went from quite bright to very dark by the end. With exposure leveling switched on, if you shoot a sequence in very changeable light, the camera will aim to smooth out the big changes in exposure for a more evenly lit video. Once again, keep watching because my most recent sequences were shot with the leveling on. So we're almost done, but I did promise to show you how to create a video later if you choose not to do it immediately after the shooting sequence. This might be because it's just late and you want to get home, or it might be that you've already created your video, but you're not happy with the frame rate and you want to create a longer or shorter version. So last night I went out and shot a couple of new time-lapse sets, this time with the leveling on by the way, and I kept one of them until this morning to create the video. As you can see when I review my photos, I can see where the folder is, but there's no option here that allows me to create my video. If I'm creating the video after the event, I have to go into the review part of the menu, where I find a time-lapse video heading. If I click that, the camera lets me choose from the available folders on my memory card. When I select the one I want, I'm back to the familiar routine of selecting my frame rate and then starting the creation process. Because this one is a smaller folder with just over 200 JPEGs, the processing time's a bit shorter, but let's skip ahead anyway to see the result. Sadly, once again, it's not the most dynamic of sunsets, but I promise you I'm saving the best for last. Now, I know this is a long video and we're almost done, but before we go I do want to show you what all this looks like when you load it up on your computer. Because remember, you haven't just shot a video, you've also just taken hundreds of still photos. So here's a look at the sunset sequence I shot earlier, and as you can see I have each and every one of the 600 individual JPEGs I shot, and then right at the bottom a couple of versions of video. And I can open them up and work on them just as I would any other photo or video. Of course I have no need to keep all of those JPEGs, but don't be too quick to delete everything until you go through them, because you might find a few keepers among the still photos as well. And now I think that's a pretty good look at shooting time-lapse video on Panasonic Lumix full-frame cameras. Once again, this was done on the S1, but the same feature can be found on the S5 and I assume on the other models too. Now I'm going to finish with my two favourite time-lapse videos, including the one you haven't seen yet, with some shooting data included for your interest. That's it from me. I'm Andrew Goodall. This is Nature's Image Photography. Thanks for watching.